Okay, I'm Lydia's grandmother, and I'm 72 years old. And I grew up in a very small rural town in Schoharie County. And we were very sheltered from the world. We had freedom to be outside and play any place we wanted with the neighborhood kids. We rode our bikes all over the streets. Everybody knew everybody else. Nobody was ever afraid. If you got in trouble, no matter where you were, you could just go knock on somebody's door and tell them to please call your mother or something. Um, and my mother stayed home. She did not work, as most of the women at that time did not work. And she had cookies and milk for my brother and I almost every day when we came home from school. We did no housework. Had no chores. I guess I did mow the lawn. My brother mowed the lawn. That was probably about it. My father was involved in politics, and every night at dinner we would discuss uh, normal things about what was going on in our lives, but he would talk about politics and what was going on in the county, what was going on in the state, what was going on in the world, and he was very interested in everything. My mother was very mild and meek and a typical housewife, very kind, very loving, not very outgoing, and my father was probably just about the opposite. Um, in school, we knew everybody in our class. I went to a one-room schoolhouse for the first 3 years, and we had such wonderful times there. I went to a rural central school starting at fourth grade. There were 65 students in my graduating class. Um, I think the times are very different now. Most mothers work, and a lot of children go home from school and there's nobody home for up to 3 or 4 hours. And that's a necessity. After World War II, that's when the women started to go to work. A lot of things changed. We always had enough money. I never thought of us as rich or poor. I never knew that there was such poverty that I have now seen. I never knew that people were living in terrible conditions. I never knew that anything about alcoholism or drug addiction. And I can see now the students that are growing up and have so many more opportunities to both succeed and to fail. We had no opportunity except to succeed. It was wouldn't even think of talking back to your mother, talking back to a teacher, a policeman. We respected authority. That is a lot different. And I'm not saying it's bad, but we did not stand up for ourselves the way I see the young people doing today. And I think it's a good thing to stand up for yourself. We wouldn't ever think of doing that. I had great grandparents. One set lived right next door, and I would be over there a lot. And my grandmother was a very good cook, and she always dressed beautifully when it was time to go out. She was very proud. She could be sick in bed one day, and the next day, if somebody invited her to go someplace, she'd jump out of that bed and get all dressed up and go. She was a hard worker, and so was my grandfather, though by the time I remember him, he was kind of an old crotchety guy. But in his youth, he was a farmer. He had an orchard. During the Depression, he helped farmers save their farms. They were very good people. They gave milk to their poor neighbors. They shared all their crops with their neighbors. My mother did the same thing. She had a huge garden. She gave away all the crops to anybody that she thought needed them. We went to church every single week with no question. My father was the financial secretary of the church for a long, long time. Peter and I went to Sunday school. He was the superintendent of the Sunday school. I played the piano. And when you came home from church on a Sunday, you had a Sunday dinner. And on Sunday nights, we would watch TV and have popcorn and hot fudge sundaes and sometimes fried egg sandwiches. So our home life was all important. And although, like, Peter played baseball, and I think I might have played some field hockey or something, it wasn't, and I did take dancing lessons, acrobat lessons, but it wasn't kids going to 5 different activities at school and constantly being out and about, and parents having to chauffeur their kids to all their activities. It was not like that at all. We might have had one activity at school. Basketball games were a big thing. They ran a bus for the basketball games. We had so much fun on those buses. The girls were on one bus and the boys were on another. And we sang silly songs and joked and laughed. And they would let us off on the corner after the games. It was probably 11, 12 o'clock, and we would walk home without even thinking about being afraid. So I guess the 50s and early 60s were an idyllic time. And when I got to college, I still had no trouble with my classes, and I seemed to get along with everybody. And most of the other students had similar backgrounds. Very few minorities. I know this is a racism and identity class. I never had any minorities in my hometown, in my school. Maybe a couple of black kids, but very, very few. And even when I was in college, it was all white, Anglo-Saxon, pretty much. So I see a lot of big differences today. I see my grandchildren traveling all over the world. We never did any of that. Never had the opportunity, and wouldn't even think of such a thing. We did go to Florida to visit my grandparents, mostly on Easter, but never would have had the opportunity to take the special classes that are offered now in high school. I mean, it was just reading, writing, and arithmetic pretty much. And now you have such a diversity of choices in school and in careers. When I was growing up, most of the women were going to be teachers or nurses or secretaries, and now a woman can be anything she wants to be, and that's great. I think because my home life was very stable, I was poised in front of a group. I knew how to speak to adults because we were involved in church, politics, and I never had any trouble speaking in front of a group. And as I got older and ran into some difficulties in my life, it was a shock to me that anything could go wrong in my life because I had lived this idyllic. And within 3 years, I lost a husband to alcoholism. We were divorced, and my mother died and my father died. And it was like the bottom fell out of my world. And I did a lot of counseling, and I said I didn't know what to do because I had never learned to deal with adversity. And that's a problem of growing up in the 50s and being so sheltered. But I had 2 children to take care of, and I had to do something. So I went back to work, and I'd probably be arrested these days. For my children were 8 and 11. They came home from school by themselves, let themselves into the house, and I would get home at 5 o'clock from work. And I ended up getting a very good job in Albany and working my way up, not because I was any smarter than anybody else, but I was older than everybody else in my department. They were all young in their 20s, and I was 35. I had some wisdom that you gain as you grow older, and so I ended up with a supervisory position, and I did very well, and I worked down there for 22 years. And I'm now retired and enjoying my life and doing a lot of things that I love to do. I'm one of the funeral ladies that serves lunch at church. Whoever thought I would ever be the little old lady serving lunch after a funeral in my church? I always made fun of them. And I'm doing some writing for my historical society. I'm in a bridge club and in a book club. I have 4 gorgeous grandchildren. I go to Florida for 6 weeks every winter, and I think I've had a very good life. The other thing I wanted to say about what is so different is the medical area. Um, Back when I was a child, there was no such thing as radiation or any kind of a cure for cancer, or no transplants of organs or anything like that. The medical uh, business has increased and improved so much. Um, I think we did, of course, there were a lot more physical labor at that time because there were a lot of farmers, and I think people were probably a little bit healthier than they are now. We didn't have all the additives in our food. We ate farm fresh pretty much because we lived in the country and that's what you ate. But I do think the advancements in the medical are just unbelievable what they can do now to treat illnesses and diseases. I think one of the most important things I've ever learned is to always take the high road whenever you can. And my father and my mother both instilled that in my brother and I. You don't hold grudges. You don't hate people. You're open to new ideas. You aren't mean or you don't swear. There was no swearing, and I hear some of these kids on the street now. Every other word is F this and F that. It just kills my ears, and they don't know how to talk. They don't know how to carry on a conversation, and of course, a lot of that we blame on the phones and all that kind of stuff. But I'm very fortunate that my friends, because I've lived in the same area all my life, are lifelong friends. The people that I go to parties with and play bridge with and in book club are people, for the most part, not all, are people I've known all my life. And although I don't have a big family, I do have a brother and the grandchildren and all that. Most of these friends would do anything for each other. We've known each other's parents, we've known each other's ups and downs and divorces and deaths and illnesses, and you cook dinner for anybody who's had an operation, you send cards to anybody who's sick. I also have a group of my high school classmates who go to lunch once a month, and there's up to 12 or 14 of us. It's hard to believe, that's with spouses, but out of the 65 that I graduated with, there's that many that stayed in this area, in my area, even though there are no jobs. And we're very rural, very poor area. But I'm real glad I grew up there. I do enjoy going into the city now and seeing Cooper and Manhattan and watching Lydia going out to college and go to Nicaragua and to Italy and to Ecuador to backpack. And I mean, it's just fun to watch. And so I guess that's my life. And I'm very content. I'm very at peace with myself. And you get that from taking the high road. Because a lot of times, if you don't take the high road, you're always going to feel guilty about something that you did. Something mean, something nasty. And it's very hard to take the high road sometimes. But that's one of the most important things I could leave with anybody today. Whenever you can, take the high road. And on the other thing is the serenity prayer. And I know you're not all religious, but it's if you believe in any kind of a higher power, it is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I forget how it goes, but anyway, it's at the end, it's the wisdom to know what you can change and what you cannot. And don't beat yourself over the head for things that you cannot change. Think about it. Do not live your life beating yourself over things that you have no control over. That's my advice.